This LOS is define a derivative and distinguish between exchange-traded and over-the-counter derivatives. Okay, before we jump into this LOS, we're just going to do an introduction to the reading. This reading is going to bring up some questions that are going to be answered. For example, what are the defining characteristics of derivatives? What purposes do derivatives serve for financial market participants? What is the distinction between a forward commitment and a contingent claim? What are forward and future contracts? In what ways are they alike? In what ways are they different? What are swaps? What are call and put options, and how do they differ from forwards, futures, and swaps? What are credit derivatives, and what are the various types of credit derivatives? What are the benefits of derivatives? What are some criticisms of derivatives, and to what extent are they well-founded? And finally, what is arbitrage, and what role does it play in a well-functioning market? So these are some of the learning outcomes that we're going to look at in this LOS and the upcoming LOS with regards to this study session. Derivatives, definitions and uses. So first we'll start with the definition, and again this is in the glossary. I encourage you always to go check out the glossary. A derivative security derives its value from the price of another underlying asset or interest rate. Okay? And then what we're going to look at first is the structure of derivatives markets. Futures and some options are traded on organized exchanges, and futures and options are derivatives. And forward contracts, swaps, credit derivatives, and some options are custom instruments created by dealers, and therefore they'd be traded over the counter. So as you can see, just a quick screenshot from the glossary. Again, I always encourage candidates to print out the glossary, copy and paste it into a Word document, print it out if you're not using the paper copy of the books. And so many questions are just based on definitions. It's important to be up to speed on them. Here we have derivatives, a financial instrument whose value depends on the value of some underlying asset or factor, for example, stock price, interest rate, or exchange rate. What is a derivative pricing rule? It's a pricing rule used by crossing networks in which a price is derived from the price that is current in the asset's primary market. Okay, so there's some terms here there with regards to derivatives. So continuing with derivatives, definitions, and uses, there are two general classes of derivatives. Some provide the ability to lock in a price at which one may buy or sell the underlying, because they force the two parties to transact in the future at a previously agreed upon price. These instruments are called forward commitments. And forward contracts, future contracts, and swaps are examples of forward commitments. Another class of derivatives provides the right, but not the obligation, to buy or sell the underlying at a predetermined price. Because the choice of buying or selling versus doing nothing depends on a particular random outcome, these derivatives are called contingent claims. The primary contingent claim is called an option. There are three types of forward commitments: forward contracts, futures contracts, and swap contracts. These contracts can be referred to more simply as forwards, futures, and swaps. A forward contract is an over-the-counter derivative contract in which two parties agree that one party, the buyer, will purchase an underlying asset from the other party, the seller, at a later date at a fixed price they agree upon when the contract is signed. A futures contract is a standardized derivative contract created and traded on a futures exchange in which two parties agree that one party, the buyer, will purchase an underlying asset from the other party, the seller, at a later date at a price agreed upon by the two parties when the contract is initiated, and in which there is a daily settling of gains and losses and a credit guarantee by the futures exchange through its clearinghouse. So that's some important points there that is often brought up in practice questions. The difference between a forward contract and a futures. A forward is over the counter. A futures is standardized and it's listed on exchange. A forward contract, you have counterparty risk, but a futures contract is got a credit guarantee by the exchange through the clearinghouse. Okay, a forward contract, there's no transfers of money during the life of the contract, but with a futures contract, there is daily settling of gains and losses. So these are some of the differences, compare and contrast between a forward contract and a future contract. It's important to be up to speed on them, okay? So a swap contract is an over-the-counter derivative contract in which the two parties agree to exchange a series of cash flows whereby one party pays a variable series that will be determined by an underlying asset or rate, and the other party pays either one, a variable series determined by a different underlying asset or rate, or two, a fixed series. The previous slide looked at forward commitments. Now we're going to look at contingent claims. And a contingent claim is a derivative in which the outcome or payoff is determined by the outcome or payoff of an underlying asset, conditional on some event occurring. So contingent claims include options, credit derivatives, and asset-backed securities. Recall the definition of an option. An option is a derivative contract in which one party, the buyer, pays a sum of money to the other party, the seller or writer, and receives the right to either buy or sell an underlying asset at a fixed price, either on a specific expiration date or at any time prior to the expiration date. So the four main types of underlying on which derivatives are based are 1, equities, 2, fixed income securities and interest rates, 3, currencies, and finally 4, commodities. Equities, fixed income securities but not interest rates, currencies and commodities are all assets. An interest rate is not an asset, but it can be structured as the underlying of a derivative. So we're just going to finish this LOS with 2 quick practice questions. The first one, a derivative is most accurately defined as a financial instrument that provides A, a return based on the return of another asset, B, an adjustment to another asset's level of risk, or C, an agreement between two parties to provide something for each other. Okay, the correct answer is A. Just have to be a little bit careful. Recall that the definition straight out of the text is a derivative security derives its value from the price of another underlying asset or interest rate, and A is a return based on the return of another asset, which is also true because as the returns to the underlying asset change, or the values change, the returns change. So it's just a little bit of being careful with the language there a little bit. Anyhow, answer A is correct. That's the definition pretty much directly out of the readings. Its return is derived from another underlying asset. And one last practice question to finish this LOS. Which of the following is least likely one of the main purposes of derivative markets? A, reveal prices and volatility of the underlying assets. B, improve market efficiency by lowering transaction costs. Or C, enable companies to more easily practice risk management. Okay, I like this question. It's a nice one to finish on because it's just a little bit tricky with regards to the English. It says, which of the following is least likely one of the main purposes of derivative markets? Reveal prices and volatility, true. Enable companies to more easily practice risk management, true. You can do hedging using derivatives, we know that. Improve market efficiency, that is true, but not by lowering transaction costs. Okay, low transaction costs are a characteristic of derivative markets, not one of the purposes. So you have to be careful sometimes. This shows you that the CFA exam is sometimes English test, in this case subject derivatives, and the key word, and that's why I always say you got to read the questions very carefully and pick up on the key word. Keywords like characteristic or purpose. In this case, it's not the purpose to improve market efficiency by lowering transaction costs. Low transaction costs are a characteristic, okay? So nice little question to finish on, and that's the last slide for this LOS. Thank you.